The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear, and Daniel Harper had never felt more alone in his life. The fluorescent lights above him flickered softly, humming like a tired heartbeat, while the clock at the end of the corridor ticked with cruel precision. Each second felt like a hammer striking against his chest. In his trembling hands was a small plastic bracelet with his daughter's name printed on it in fading ink. Inside the sterile white room at the end of the hall, 5-year-old Lily was undergoing tests that would determine whether the shadow hanging over their lives had a name too terrible to say out loud. Before we continue, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in kindness and second chances. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest corridors, light can find its way in. Daniel had never imagined fatherhood would look like this. When Lily was born, he had held her against his chest and promised he would always protect her. He had not imagined that protection would mean learning how to braid hair before school, how to pack lunches with heart-shaped sandwiches, how to read bedtime stories with silly voices after 12-hour construction shifts. He had not imagined it would mean sitting alone in a hospital corridor while other families whispered in clusters, clinging to one another for strength he didn't have. Lily's mother had left when Lily was 2. The departure had been swift and cold, like a door slammed in winter. Daniel had begged her to stay, not for him but for their daughter, but some hearts are not meant to anchor. Since then, it had been just the two of them in a tiny apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were thin, the heating unreliable, but laughter had filled every crack. Lily's giggles had been the glue holding Daniel together through layoffs, unpaid bills, and nights when exhaustion pressed so heavily on him that he wondered how long he could keep going. 3 weeks earlier, Lily had fainted in the grocery store aisle. One moment she had been reaching for a box of cereal with a cartoon tiger, and the next she had crumpled to the floor like a fallen doll. Daniel had felt his world tilt violently. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and whispered reassurances he did not believe. Since then, there had been blood tests, scans, consultations, and a growing silence from doctors that terrified him more than any diagnosis. Now he sat alone because he had no one to call. His parents had passed years ago, his friends were good men, but they had families of their own and lives that could not pause indefinitely. He did not want pity, he did not want to burden anyone, he just wanted his little girl to be okay. Across the hallway, a group of sharply dressed individuals stood near a private suite. Their clothes were tailored, their watches expensive, their voices hushed but confident. Daniel barely noticed them at first. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of the clock and the steady thrum of his anxiety. But then the elevator doors opened, and a woman stepped out who seemed to change the air itself. She moved with quiet authority, her heels clicking against the polished floor like punctuation marks in a decisive sentence. Her hair was swept back neatly, her expression composed yet wary. She was not loud or flamboyant, but people shifted instinctively when she passed. Daniel recognized her face from billboards near downtown skyscrapers. She was Victoria Langford, the CEO of one of the largest tech firms in the state, a woman often described in headlines as formidable and untouchable. Yet as she approached the private suite, Daniel saw something in her eyes that no headline had ever captured. It was fear. Raw, unguarded fear. He tried not to stare. Wealth and power had never impressed him much. He had learned early that they could vanish as quickly as they appeared. But when one of the suited men stepped in front of Victoria and began speaking urgently, Daniel overheard fragments about shareholders, optics, and media presence. It felt grotesque, discussing corporate image in a place where children fought invisible battles. Moments later, a nurse approached Daniel with a clipboard, asking him to confirm insurance information again. His hands shook as he signed. The nurse's expression softened with sympathy, but sympathy did not change outcomes. After she left, Daniel pressed his elbows to his knees and buried his face in his palms. He whispered a prayer he was not even sure he believed in anymore. That was when he felt someone sit beside him. He looked up, startled, and found Victoria Langford lowering herself into the plastic chair next to his. Up close, she looked less like a magazine cover and more like a mother who had not slept. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and her perfectly styled hair had loosened slightly at the edges. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed to narrow around them, two strangers bound by a shared terror. She leaned closer, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lights, and whispered the words that would change both their lives. "Pretend you're my husband." Daniel blinked, certain he had misheard. But her gaze was steady, urgent. She explained in rushed fragments that reporters had caught wind of her son's condition. Investors were already speculating about her stability as CEO. If the media saw her alone vulnerable, it would feed narratives she had spent years fighting. She needed to appear supported, anchored. Just until the reporters outside lost interest, she would compensate him generously. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. His daughter lay in a hospital room, possibly facing something catastrophic, and this stranger was asking him to play a role in her corporate theater. It felt absurd, even insulting. But then he saw the tremor in her hands. He recognized it because his own hands had been shaking like that for weeks. Fear does not discriminate between bank accounts. He thought of Lily, of mounting medical bills, of the uncertainty that stretched before them like a stormy sea. He did not want charity, but he also could not ignore reality. If pretending to be someone's husband for a few hours could ease her burden and maybe, just maybe, ease his own financial strain, what harm would it do? He nodded once. Within minutes, the transformation was surreal. Victoria's team adjusted their positions, subtly incorporating Daniel into their circle. When reporters' cameras flashed at the end of the corridor, Victoria slipped her hand through Daniel's arm. The gesture was light but deliberate. To the outside world, they were a united front, a powerful couple facing adversity together. Daniel felt awkward in his worn jeans and scuffed boots among tailored suits, but something unexpected happened as they stood side by side. Victoria's breathing steadied. Her grip tightened slightly, not as a performance but as a lifeline. In that moment, it stopped being about optics. It became about two parents pretending strength for different reasons. When the brief media encounter ended and the hallway quieted again, they returned to their seats. Victoria did not release his arm immediately. She looked at him with an expression that was no longer strategic but deeply human. She asked about his child, and Daniel, who had not intended to open up, found himself telling her everything. He spoke about Lily's love for butterflies, about the way she insisted on wearing mismatched socks because she said they were best friends who should not be separated. He admitted how terrified he was of the test results. His voice cracked when he described holding her small hand as doctors inserted needles. Victoria listened without interruption. When he finished, she shared that her own son, 8-year-old Ethan, was being tested for a rare autoimmune disorder. She confessed that despite all her resources, she felt powerless. Money could buy specialists, private rooms, and cutting-edge diagnostics, but it could not guarantee a healthy child. Hours passed. The clock continued its merciless ticking, but something had shifted. Daniel was no longer entirely alone. When a doctor finally emerged from Lily's room, Daniel shot to his feet so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Victoria stood too, instinctively squeezing his hand before letting go. The doctor's expression was serious but not catastrophic. The tests suggested a severe but treatable blood disorder. It would require ongoing treatment, careful monitoring, and significant expense, but it was not the worst-case scenario Daniel had feared. His knees nearly gave out with relief. Tears blurred his vision as he thanked the doctor repeatedly. Victoria watched from a distance, her own eyes glistening. Not long after, a physician approached her as well. Daniel could not hear the details, but he saw her shoulders sag in relief. Ethan's condition, too, was manageable with early intervention. 2 storms had passed, leaving behind exhausted survivors. Daniel gathered his jacket, preparing to return to Lily's room, when Victoria touched his arm once more. She thanked him sincerely, not as a CEO, but as a mother. Then she did something he did not expect. She asked if he would consider a more permanent arrangement. Not as her husband in truth, but as an employee. She had noticed his calm under pressure, his integrity, the way he spoke about responsibility. Her company was launching a community outreach initiative focused on supporting families facing medical crises. She wanted someone who understood those struggles firsthand. The position would include training, a steady salary, and health benefits that would cover Lily's treatments. Daniel was stunned. He had spent years feeling invisible, just another laborer on a construction site. Now someone saw value in his resilience. He hesitated, pride wrestling with practicality. But when he thought of Lily's future, of fewer nights worrying about bills, the answer became clear. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's life transformed in ways he could not have imagined while sitting in that sterile hallway. He began working with Victoria's company, helping design programs that provided financial counseling, emotional support groups, and partnerships with hospitals. He visited families in waiting rooms like the one where his story had shifted. He sat beside fathers and mothers who looked as lost as he once had, offering not empty platitudes but understanding. Victoria kept her promise. She ensured Lily received the best care available. But she did more than write checks. She visited occasionally, bringing Ethan along. The children became friends, bonding over hospital stickers and shared bravery. Daniel and Victoria developed a quiet friendship rooted not in pretense but in shared vulnerability. Rumors inevitably circulated about their staged appearance in the hospital months earlier. Speculation flared in tabloids, but neither of them addressed it publicly. The truth felt sacred, too intimate for headlines. One evening, nearly a year after that first encounter, Daniel found himself once again in a hospital corridor. This time it was for a routine checkup, and Lily was laughing inside the exam room. He leaned against the wall, remembering the man he had been that night, broken, terrified, alone. Victoria approached, having brought Ethan for his own appointment. They stood side by side, not pretending anything. She remarked softly that sometimes the most unexpected alliances are born from desperation. Daniel agreed. He had learned that pride can isolate, but vulnerability can connect. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to engage with the video. Like it, share it with someone who needs hope, and let us know your thoughts. Your support keeps stories of resilience alive. Life did not become perfect. Lily still faced treatments. Daniel still had days when fear crept back in. Victoria continued navigating corporate battles, but they no longer faced their storms in isolation. Their children grew stronger, their laughter echoing in hospital halls that once felt suffocating. On the anniversary of that first hospital visit, Daniel organized a small gathering for families supported by the outreach program. There were balloons, simple food, and a wall covered in handwritten notes from parents expressing gratitude. Victoria stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching as Daniel knelt to help a little boy tie his shoelaces. She realized then that the whisper she had spoken out of desperation had set in motion something far greater than damage control. It had created a bridge between worlds that rarely intersected. It had reminded her that strength is not measured by quarterly earnings, but by the willingness to stand beside someone in their darkest hour. Just before we reach the end, I have a special request for you. Please comment the word hope if you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Years later, when Lily was healthy enough to run across a park without collapsing, Daniel would watch her chase butterflies and think about that night in the hospital. He would remember the flickering lights, the ticking clock, the crushing loneliness. He would remember a stranger sitting beside him and asking for a simple, strange favor. And he would understand that sometimes miracles do not arrive as dramatic rescues. Sometimes they arrive as whispered requests in sterile hallways, as hands reaching out in shared fear, as opportunities disguised as inconveniences. Daniel never became Victoria's husband in truth, but in many ways, they became family. Not bound by romance, but by gratitude, respect, and the unspoken promise that neither would ever let the other stand alone in a hospital corridor again. And in the quiet moments, when Lily curled up beside him at night, Daniel would hold her close and realize that the greatest transformation had not been financial or professional. It had been internal. He was no longer just a single dad surviving day by day. He was proof that even in the loneliest hours, kindness can rewrite a destiny. Because sometimes all it takes to change a life is a whisper,